Wow, I really, really, really hope that this tripod works. My mom got me a new tripod and it's really cute, but it's from 5 and below, so it doesn't really work. And I don't have the heart to tell her, so I'm gonna use it no matter what. I was using, actually I'll show you. I was using this. I was sticking my phone inside of it and they were like, the edges were like clipping into this. And I'd sit it on a laundry basket, and that's what I was using before. But now I don't have to because I have my little tripod from 5 and below. So thanks, Mom. She's so supportive. All right, hello. I didn't upload on Saturday. I don't really know if I have an excuse for that, except for this week was really weird because I'm only working at one job now, and although it's still full-time, it's still over full-time, I had so much more free time than I have had in a while. So I've been a little lazy. And I kind of knew, like, I had a really weird weekend and I ended up working on Saturday and it just kind of felt funny. And I knew I was going to upload pretty shortly after that, but then I'm pretty sure I had an allergic reaction to mosquito bites. I'm like really, really allergic to mosquitoes and they're very attracted to me because I have O-type blood. And I went swimming this weekend, or I don't even remember when, a couple days ago, I guess. And I got ate up, absolutely destroyed by mosquitoes. And I kind of knew I wasn't going to be feeling good, but I was fine up until yesterday, which was Tuesday, and just in the middle of the day while I was working with my client, I started to feel really, really weird, like sick, weird, not good. And I don't know how to explain it. My skin started breaking out. I had like these weird hives all over my arms and stuff. They're not there anymore, but it was very bizarre actually. They were like really weird, but my whole body burned so bad. I was burning hot. I was sweating so bad. I don't sweat either, so that was really weird. I thought I was dying, and I kept thinking that my throat was swelling up, but looking back now, I think that I was so nervous knowing that I was having some type of allergic reaction that I thought that my throat was swelling, but in reality I was just having an anxiety attack over my allergy. It was really scary, and I feel a little better today. I actually still don't feel very good, but I finished my research, I did everything, and I was like, you know what, I've got so much free time, I'm gonna go ahead and do this finally. Even though now I'm not feeling the best, I'm still gonna do it. That way I can still post my last Psych Saturday, well, part 4 of the Psych Saturday series type of deal on Saturday. This is gonna be up on Thursday, hopefully. It's actually Thursday right now. It's 12:30 at night, so. I just got done watching a 3-part series from Stephanie Harlow about the Kaylee Anthony case, and that took it out of me, honestly. That really took it out of me. And then I followed it up immediately with Jenna Marbles' new video about her camping in her yard. It kind of helped before I started recording, but man, I'm still just I'm spent. Today's video is going to be on the Milgram experiment. This is part 3 of this series, and I didn't turn off my AC. Okay, so I just turned off my air conditioning. If you heard a weird little rattling noise up until now, my air conditioning duct in this room, only this room, makes this weird rattling noise, and I have to turn it off whenever I record, so. And I forgot until now. This is part 3. The next part will be up on Saturday. I'm probably actually going to record it either right after this or tomorrow sometime during the day. So I just finished my research finally for this because there was just a lot. I kind of had to cross-reference a lot of stuff. I wanted to make sure I got everything right. And of course, I'm going to have my sources in the description. But I just kind of wanted to make sure because some things were a little conflicting. Stay hydrated all 2019. And so I really wanted to cross-reference this a lot. I wanted to make sure I had every detail that I could find, because a lot of sources, just because this is like a really, it's not a basic experiment, but it is kind of like it's easy to understand exactly what happened. So I feel like a lot of sources were leaving out a lot of key details. Like there were a lot of things that I learned just in this research that I didn't know before, and I've heard about this experiment probably in almost every single course I've taken for the past 3 years. So, I mean, to be able to find new information about it, like, it was a little confusing because I wanted to make sure it was all right. I didn't know if maybe some of it was kind of, like it could be right, could be wrong. I wanted to make sure that everything was right before I started actually recording. The Milgram obedience experiment was done by someone named Stanley Milgram. He conducted this experiment at Yale University in 1961. Stanley Milgram was born August 15th, 1933. He was born into a family of Jewish immigrants that moved to New York. Stanley attended James Monroe High School, and something that I found very interesting that I didn't know, I've never heard this, I feel like I would have heard this just because it's kind of an interesting fact, but he actually attended high school with Philip Zimbardo. And if you don't know who that is, Zimbardo actually performed the Zimbardo prison experiment, which I'm going to talk about in a whole separate video on it. It's actually very interesting as well. There's a lot of stuff that happens in that experiment, and it's going to be one of those experiments where I'm going to have to really research it, just because there's a lot. That experiment actually also, I would say, is unethical. Some people feel differently, but I would personally say that's also an unethical experiment. So that's probably something I'm going to talk about after I end this series. I don't know how long after, but I'm going to talk about it. But he actually went to high school with him, which I think is very odd. Just because they both do psychological experiments that were deemed unethical. And it's interesting because, as I'm about to talk about, Milgram didn't really immediately have an interest in psychology. He actually graduated from Queens College in 1954 with a bachelor's in political science. And it wasn't until after this that he started to gain some type of interest in psychology. He actually applied to Harvard University and was actually denied because he had never taken a psychology course ever. And they were like, why are you trying to apply to Harvard for social psychology? But he did eventually get accepted, and he did graduate with a PhD in social psychology. He didn't graduate with this PhD until 1960, which is only 1 year before this experiment took place. So let's go ahead and start talking about the actual experiment itself. What Milgram wanted to do was he wanted to look more into obedience, which where this stemmed from was the obedience that Nazis had towards Adolf Hitler in World War II. They were very obedient to him, so much so that they killed people just because authority told them to. And he wanted to look more into what kind of effects authority have on people and their obedience toward them. Now, I did see on one particular source that Milgram had stated that he wanted to specifically look at the obedience that Germans had towards authority, But I only saw that on one source, and I don't think that they actually really geared towards just Germans for this experiment. Like, I don't think they only brought in participants who were German. So I don't know how accurate that is, but Milgram did want to specifically look at how people would react based on doing things that authority would tell them. Like, how obedient were they willing to be, so much so that they were harming people? Were they willing to get to that point? Were they willing to actually hurt or kill people just because someone of a higher authority than them, someone who they deemed to be smarter, more powerful than them, just because they tell them to? That is the main purpose of this experiment. They wanted to see how someone would react in the face of authority. So he got volunteers by responding to an ad. The volunteers would respond, and they were under the impression that they were doing a learning experiment, like a learning task. They had no idea what the actual experiment was looking for. They weren't aware of what the actual intentions or the actual real setup of the experiment was. The participants were told that they were going to be either assigned as a learner or a teacher in this experiment. But unknowing to them, they were all going to end up being assigned as the teacher role, while a Confederate, which is someone who is like a participant that is aware of the experiment, someone who's working for the experiment, like they know the actual true nature of the experiment. The Confederate was always the learner. All the participants who responded to this ad ended up being the teacher. So the teacher and the experimenter were in one room, while the learner was in a completely separate room. Both rooms were connected with microphones. So they were able to hear each other, but they were in two separate rooms. The teacher obviously was going to be conducting the experiment, while the learner was going to be the one participating in the experiment. And the experimenter was just there to observe and make sure everything was going smoothly. What they had to do was, whenever the experiment started, the teacher and the learner would go over a list of paired words. They would pair these words together, and the learner would have to memorize them and then recall them later. Now, the learner was in the other room, hooked up to these electrodes that were connected to this machine that the teacher was controlling. When the learner got a question wrong, so they weren't able to recall the correct word that was paired with another word, they would be shocked. Now, the shocks were in 15-volt increments. They started at 15 volts and went all the way up to 450 volts. The machine was actually labeled. So at 75 volts, it was labeled as a small shock. And up until 330 volts, where it said danger, severe shock. And at 450 volts, it was just labeled with 3 X's. So 450 volts is a lethal amount of shock. That was the last voltage that was on this machine that the teacher could possibly administer. Now, the experimenter actually did have a role in the actual experiment itself. They weren't just observing. They actually had a script as well. So the experimenter, whenever the teacher started to have doubts at any point, they actually had these 4 prods that they would use in order to kind of convey this message to the teacher. And those prods were basically to kind of push them with the use of authority. The first prod was please continue. second prod was the experiment requires you to continue. The third prod was it is absolutely essential that you continue. And the fourth prod was you have no other choice but to continue. So the more that the teacher would protest or try to end their involvement in the experiment, the experimenter would say things like, please continue, or it's absolutely essential that you continue, or you have no other choice. That is where the authority part comes in. Like, this authority figure is telling you what to do. You now have the choice of to listen to the authority or to listen to your morals, basically. Now, with this, the learner actually also had scripted responses to the shock. So, starting at 75 volts, the learner would start to yell. Now, when it got to 150 volts, the learner started to protest, like they started to actually complain, like saying things like, I can't do this, like this is terrible, like I want to stop. And at 330 volts, the learner was done talking. They stopped talking altogether, and there was no response up until 450 volts. So that kind of left it up to the teacher to imagine, like, oh, are they just not talking to me now, or is something wrong with them? Like, they had no way of knowing if something was wrong. And even if they didn't respond to the questions, at a certain point, the experimenter would tell them, like, okay, shock them, even if they weren't answering, because that was deemed a wrong answer. Now, the results of the actual experiment itself. This is kind of wild to me, because as someone who knows about the experiment now, I couldn't imagine myself being in this situation and doing the same things that the participants did, but 65% of the participants got to 450 volts, got to a lethal dose of electric shock. And all of them, every single participant got to at least 300. Every single participant thought this entire time they were doing some type of harm, and they continued, at least to some harmful voltage. Milgram actually recreated this experiment into 18 different variations, where he just kind of changed the independent variable every time to see how obedience would change. It's interesting because I, along with most other people, would say that this is an unethical experiment, because they are using deception. They are causing the participants to think that they are actually killing people, that they are committing murder, or at least genuinely harming the other participants, and they feel like they have no other choice. They feel like they're being forced, which is, of course, the nature of this experiment. They're seeing how obedient someone is actually willing to be, even if it means possibly killing someone. And it is an unethical experiment. I do think it is very interesting, because it has taught a lot about obedience and how far people are willing to go just to listen to someone of authority, to listen to someone in a white coat with a freaking clipboard telling them, hey, you have to shock these people, like they're getting these questions wrong, they're getting these word pairings wrong, so you have to shock them. You can't really stop, you're stuck, you know what I mean? It's a very interesting experiment, actually, and it's odd because this experiment, it did take place during the time period where the Tuskegee syphilis experiment was occurring. So I would say that this experiment did have a say in the Belmont report. Probably a pretty decent one, because they are still using this deception and using an unethical way of observing the obedience that someone has. And it is important to know that if something like this, if research is being taken place that is causing someone mental trauma, like, I'm sure that these people were feeling a lot of different emotions during this. I don't think it's fair to kind of compare them to the Nazis during World War II, because I feel like at some point the people who were under Hitler's power probably got past that point. Like, I'm sure at first they kind of felt some type of mental trauma towards killing someone just because Adolf Hitler told them to, or just killing people because generals were telling them to. I'm sure that at first they felt that way, and then at some point they kind of were just like, well, this is just how it is now. This is life now. Like, we're in the middle of a war. Like, this is what I gotta do, which obviously is wrong. Like, obviously they did not have to do that. But I'm sure that the repercussions for not listening to Adolf Hitler or not listening to other Nazi generals was probably death. When in reality, for this experiment, I'm sure that these participants didn't think that they were going to be killed if they didn't continue. Obviously, because some people stopped at 300 volts. They were able to stop. They were able to get up and be like, this is ridiculous. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm hurting this person. I'm leaving. Bye. But, the people who got to 450 volts, I'm sure that was very, very traumatic for them. And that's not right. Whenever you're conducting any type of experiment or research, it's not okay to inflict mental trauma on participants that are in the experiment. Like, they felt like because of the prods, they weren't given the option to back out of the experiment. While we know now, because of the Belmont report, which of course we're going to talk in the next video about, because of that, now we know that it is and should always be in all research totally 100% up to the participant to be able to back out of any type of research without any repercussions at any point. Like, if they feel uncomfortable at any point, if they feel like they don't believe in this, if they feel like they are uncomfortable going on with the research, they can leave. They can back out. They can be like, yep, I'm done. And the researcher just has to be like, okay, thanks for your help. This experiment is very interesting because I genuinely think that in every single course I've ever taken, especially social psychology, my favorite class of all time. My professor was amazing, but we talked about it a lot. We've talked about it in every single course I've ever taken on psychology, because it's a very big deal. It's a very big experiment. It's something that really kind of ties into other psychological things, research-related things, and I just find it very interesting. I'm glad I got to talk about it, and I'm really excited now to talk about the Zimbardo experiment, because that one is a hoot. Honestly, that one's wild. And that one's going to be a very fun one to talk about as well. It's going to be very interesting to research as well as listen to, because it's a lot. So thank you for watching this video. I'm sorry I was late on the upload. I honestly was feeling pretty sick, and it's just been kind of like a crazy schedule. I wasn't able to record and upload obviously on Saturday because I was working, and then I got sick right after. So hopefully I'm feeling better and I can keep working on videos. I've actually got a list of videos that I'm going to be making, and I might honestly just put a couple on the back burner just to get the Zimbardo experiment. I might try to get that out after the Belmont report, like the next Saturday, if not the one after that. So I don't know, but thank you guys for listening, and if you guys have anything anything to say about my editing or research or the way I speak or the way I explain things, please comment, because I still haven't really figured out how I want to do this yet. I'm not very good at editing yet. If you guys have any suggestions, I'm all ears, because I want to keep being able to do this, and I want to keep improving any way I can. So yeah, so if you guys liked it, please like it or subscribe, and definitely watch the next video, because it's gonna be very interesting. So, but yeah, and I will see you guys Saturday. Yeah, bye.